One of my first jobs was as a law clerk in the 90s for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal services in Brisbane. I assisted the families of several people murdered in Queensland police custody. There was always something genocidal about those instances. And in those instances, no police officer was ever charged and no police officer or politician ever said sorry. By 2004, Prime Minister Howard was already resigned to the fact that he wasn't going to say sorry. His government and his Australia would not be responsible for the past. My great-grandfather, the first Sam Watson, worked hard, him and my great-grandmother. He was granted an exemption from the Act. They both missed out on a childhood, but no one in our family was ever taken away. On 12th of February 2008, I'd pulled a 14 to 15 hour shift as a security supervisor on an industrial site in Brisbane. I knew there was something significant happening in Canberra, but when you're working the graveyard shift consecutively, it just saps you. I actually slept through the apology, 7 hours deep sleep and then back to work. But when I got to work, and I worked on a site that was predominantly staffed by Polynesian and Māori workers, the boys literally formed an honour guard when I walked in. Most of these guys had lived through significant political events involving Indigenous rights in New Zealand. These men were ecstatic about the apology, where I was still trying to process it, and today even, I'm still trying to process the apology. Rudd said he'd do it, and he did. What all Australians received that day was a chance to renew their vision of history, some clarity about our national identity. And there's the clarity that the stolen generation deserve from an apology from a sincere Australian leader. I have trouble trusting any politician, any words, any forthcomings. They all have limited political shelf lives. As a writer, I visualise words as living entities. And it worried me to think that a generation of Australians through this would actually one day fear the word sorry, because in the present climate, more than ever, it belongs to the stolen generation. Sorry belongs to a future of healing, compassion and hope.
Well, the day of the apology was the 13th of February 2008. I was sitting in the press gallery in Parliament House, watching the Prime Minister as he presented his apology. To look around that chamber and see the galleries full of people, black faces, white faces, people that I knew, people that I didn't know. And then to look down on the floor of the chamber itself and see those elders from the stolen generations that were acknowledged. Those elders representing many, many more people of stolen generations, seeing them sitting on the floor of the chamber, a few feet away from where the Prime Minister was presenting or delivering his apology. It was an historical moment because for the last 12 years or more we've had a very mean-spirited Prime Minister. Sorry was not a part of his vocabulary. People were very emotional. Blacks and whites had tears streaming down their faces. Others just had a watery eye, like myself. It brought a tear to a lot of eyes. And I was thinking of my grandfather, Sam Watson, taken away along with a lot of other young boys of the same age group. He was taken away from Nebo, taken by white pastoralists that came around in a horse and cart, and those young boys were just grabbed and thrown in the back of that cart. He never saw his mum again. And the impact on my mother and her brothers and sisters, it took them a long time to find out about their country, their language, their songs and dances. That grandfather Sam was flogged by a dog chain, tied up by a dog chain, flogged by that dog chain if he spoke the language or sung any of the songs or done any dances. So that cultural business ceased when he was taken away. And that's who that apology was meant for, people like grandfather Sam Watson. And there's many of those people across the country. Almost every Aboriginal family in this country has that experience in their family somewhere along the line. That step taken by the Prime Minister with his apology on that day has made a lot of mainstream Australians feel it is now okay to recognise the struggle of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. As opposed to the previous Prime Minister, where we had racists coming out of the woodwork. It's created a change. It's a new era in our time. And mind you, saying sorry is only the very first step. But it's a major acknowledgement. It was a major event for us. But we've got a long way to go.
For me, as someone who has to make decisions in government, decisions about laws and where we spend money, one of the really powerful things about a bipartisan apology was that it really sort of settled the question of there was serious injustice done. And as a result of that serious injustice, many people in our community today are still struggling with the results of that. So these are all things we're all living with. This is not a long time ago thing, this is now. Our parliament was sitting, and given the daylight saving change, I thought it was too early for screens, people would still be on trains, and so we thought at the very least we would like to get a number of people who had experienced this in their own lives together, members of the stolen generation and some of their friends and family, together at Parliament House for a breakfast as in the lead up to it. So while I knew it was always going to be emotional, I have to say until I stood in front of the crowd and saw so many of them with tears just rolling down their face, particularly a lot of the old people, to see old people just openly weeping is very moving. Some of it was reliving old memories, but some of it was also tears of relief. Finally, after they're waiting their whole lives, they were being recognised and they were being validated. For me, it was still disappointing on the day that there were still people, including some people in the Queensland Parliament, who were still wanting to talk about the fact that some Aboriginal children, the people were trying to do the right thing and take them away from bad circumstances. There was already provision for that, as there should be. This was an entirely separate provision in the legislation. It said the state can remove a child from their parents if they're Aboriginal. Full stop. It was a policy, an act of policy, and captured in legislation and enforced. This will now go into our history books. There may well be many Australians who are still not quite sure what it all means, but increasingly we will see, I think, our schools teaching children about this moment in our history. What I hoped on that day, what was in my heart on that day in the Parliament, was a real sense of renewed hope. And what I hope in 10 years' time is that we can look back and say that was the beginning of things really starting to get better.